And we're live. Welcome to the Brown Bag Business Chat. I'm your host, Adam Fout, the content writer and social media manager at Blue Steel Solutions. And with me is the lovely Cassie Green, our designer. Would you like to say hi, Cassie?
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hi, Cassie. And today we're going to talk to you about design, specifically web design. So this is something that one of our core services is web design. We also often do web development as well. But something that we see and that most people see regularly is poor web design, not because people are purposefully doing a bad job, but because the principles are not commonly known. And so this is something, and usually what's going on is clients just don't have time to do this kind of stuff. They're not trained in it. They're busy running a business. So that's why they come to us and they throw something together that they know doesn't look great, but that they need at the moment. And when they come to us, they need something improved. Sometimes when they come to us, they're ready for something completely new. So what we're going to talk about today, the title of this presentation is, or this video is, we're bringing simple back. And I think that one of the hardest parts of coming up with a design for your website is cutting things out. It's very easy to keep adding and keep adding and keep adding and come up with something that's really complicated and find out later that all that stuff you added in that felt so necessary at the time actually looks kind of bad. And so what we want to do, and this goes with our presentation series on website review, getting your website back to the point that it needs to be. So we're going to start with, Cassie's going to give us a brief overview. Cassie, just to give you a little background, has a degree in graphic design from Texas Women's University. And she knows a little bit about design at this point. So she's going to talk to us specifically about web design and some principles behind that. And then we're going to get into specifics and talk about colors, about calls to action, about the point of design, and about getting away from this needs to be pretty or have all these different things and needs to be beautiful to, is it functional? Is it doing the things I need it to do? And with that, Cassie, would you like to go ahead and start?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Okay, so from what I've seen lately after looking at various sites, because one of the first steps a designer has to take when they're creating websites is for a client is you have to look at websites within that specific industry or competitors' websites. Well, I've seen a lot of websites where people are using a lot of CSS and animations and a lot of gimmicky stuff that could possibly overwhelm your website and detract from the content that's being presented to the viewers. So,
and when you say overwhelm your website, do you also mean like slow down your website or reduce load times?
right, exactly. So that's a very good point also. A lot of the times the viewer doesn't want to sit there and just be waiting for a loading screen just because they're waiting on some kind of flash animation or something to pop up. The sooner you can get your important content to the viewer, the better. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there was a time when people were willing to wait for a website to load because frankly, the internet was new not too long ago and nobody knew how long a website was or wasn't supposed to load. And we all had a little bit more patience then, I think.
right.
But today, nobody has the patience for it. People aren't going to wait for a website to load. And a lot of the time, you can't assume that your website is going to be seen on the fastest PC that's on the market. You can't assume that they're going to see it on the best smartphone that exists. Many people may be accessing your website from, with a bad signal on a cell phone that's 10 years old that they've been using this whole time, and frankly, they're not going to change. They might be accessing it from a computer from a decade ago, and they might be using some old browsers. So the simpler your website is, the less likely it is to destroy that load time and even get loaded in the first place.
Right. And another point to more elaborate on that idea is the more sure you are about having your website work on different platforms, the more reliable your relationship is with your target audience. If you're not sure it's going to work through a particular medium, then you don't know if you're reaching your target audience successfully. So it's better to use a more simple approach to reach your audience and get the content out there instead of focusing on what is pretty and what looks good, which a lot of designers like me like to do, but that comes second after what's really important, which is the content.
Right, and it's easy to let this fall into it's art. I'm just making art online and make it all kinds of flowery and beautiful, and that's great for someone whose goal is to create that exact thing, an art on a website. But for most, you brought up a really good point. Does this work for your target audience?
Mm-hmm.
And your audience isn't worried 90% of the time about something being incredibly gorgeous and wowing them. They're coming there for information. And if things look really nice and incredibly beautiful, that might help. But a lot, like you said, a lot of the time it can be distracting. And sometimes having something that's really incredible and beautiful isn't very functional. I'd noticed, Cassie, could you do me a favor? There's a behind you on the wall, there's a calendar. I don't know if you can get that off the wall or not. But if you could get that off the wall and bring it over here, it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So thank you, Cassie. Could you hold that up for just a second? Okay. Hold it up a little higher so they can see the numbers. You might have to say something to get the view to change. There we go. That did it. So this calendar, as you can see, it's really pretty. It's got a simple design. Thank you, Cassie. That's probably sufficient. But it's got a simple, uncluttered design. But it's very pretty. However, it's not super functional. All those numbers are just kind of crammed together. There's no room to write notes on each day. Now, there was a lot of white space around it, so you could make notes going around it. But that's not really useful for most people. Most people need to look at that specific day. And if I have lines going off all over the place on this calendar, it's going to be hard for me to figure out what's going on where. So while that calendar is gorgeous, I think it's really pretty. I love it. Totally useless. It does nothing other than being able to mark off the dates, which my phone can do just fine. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that I think even when you have a simple design, that still doesn't necessarily mean it's doing what your audience needs it to do. Because in this case, if I'm the audience for that calendar, it has failed me, because I don't need a calendar that looks nice. I need one that's functional. And most people who are coming to your website, they're looking to do certain things, take certain actions. And if the beauty trumps the content or the function that needs to happen, if they can't do what they need to do, or they don't get the information they need to get, then the website has failed.
Right. And another thing that goes along with that, to kind of elaborate on this idea of simplicity, is I see a lot of people using very outlandish, kind of not really sticking to their branding color palettes on their websites. So like Blue Steel Solutions example, we use a lot of orange and blue on our website because our website is an extension of our brand, as it should be for all businesses. And I see a lot of people who kind of stray from that path, and they'll start using colors that aren't incorporated into their logo or aren't incorporated into their brand. Or also they don't take into consideration the types of emotions that certain colors can convey. Like a company that may be professional could use like the color pink, and that doesn't really convey professionalism on their website.
No, it probably doesn't. No, I think you make an excellent point, is that, we talk about this constantly, I feel like, but it's really important, which is why we always talk about it, which is that audience and branding are critical to figuring out what your website is going to look like and what it's going to do. So the content that you have on your website is driven, a lot of it is driven by your audience. What do they need? What do they want to know? And, you know, if you're selling things, what do they want to buy? That determines a, you know, huge portion of your content if you've got a e-commerce situation. But branding is just as important. If someone clicks, you know, on our website or loads our website, and they know from all our other branding and from the business card that they have when they, you know, went and talked to us, and other print pieces maybe that we put out there, that orange and blue, those are our colors, and they have this logo in mind, and then they go to our website and maybe they see a different logo, and they see some different colors. They get confused and they say, this must be the wrong site. And then they click out and they can't find us. They say, well, you know, there are several other marketing companies in Denton. Let's go talk to them. So I think that, you know, and that's something that I have seen before with some people, some clients even, is having several logos and you wanting to use one logo over another, or using both. And that can be confusing to customers, and especially if they're familiar with one logo over the other. So little things like that, you know, you want to think in terms of, not look at the website and say, this is beautiful. You want to say, this does what my customers need it to do, and it reinforces my brand and shows them, yes, indeed, this is the right place. You found the people you're looking for.
Right, right. And just number one rule, something that's always drilled into the graphic design community, is just consistency, consistency, consistency. If you use a certain typeface on your business card or on your letterhead, then you need to use that typeface and incorporate it into your website.
Absolutely.
You need to have the same type of formatting on your letterhead as you do in your website. You need to use the same design accents and incorporate them throughout. It just has to go together like a nicely wrapped package. That way you can present it to your customers in a way that they can easily understand and know, this is this company, and I know they stand for this because I've seen it through their branding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and that applies not just on, you know, if we want to talk about this a little more specifically, when we say consistency, let's talk about across the website, because it's not uncommon to go to someone's homepage and all the branding and the colors look great,
Right.
and then click on some other page and suddenly it's all gone, and it looks completely differently, or it looks different enough that it's confusing. And then you might click on another page and it goes back to the same branding, or you go to something else that's going on. So that can be really confusing to your target audience, and it can make people think, I have gone to the wrong website, I have clicked the wrong link. And some people may even think, if it's different enough and strange enough looking, they may even say, oh my gosh, this is spam, or this is a virus, or something terrible is happening, I should never go to this website again. And that's obviously not good. So I think that consistency is key, not just between like all my, you know, my offline branded stuff and my online branded stuff, and my social media branded stuff, but also within the website itself.
Right.
And so sometimes you do have to send someone, you know, to another site for, you know, if you're using PayPal or Stripe or something like that. Sometimes you can't always keep them on the site and you can't control that experience. But at least in cases like that, they know you can give them a message and say, okay, you know, you're going to an outside site, but they know it's trusted. So you just want to be careful of not using, not having, or having inconsistency across your site.
Right, right. And when you're designing your site, it needs to be very intuitive and it needs to flow well so that your viewer can navigate through the information easily. Like if your homepage is designed in a centralized two-column format, or maybe it's left justified three-column format, then you need to try and carry that and maintain that layout throughout your site so it flows more evenly, so the information is presented in a consistent manner and it's not too jarring for the person to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that another way that you can have consistency across the site is with the same header and footer on each
Right.
page, the same menu or
Hmm.
sidebar, stuff like that. Just elements that are repeated throughout the website
Hmm.
make for a good design. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is that we push a lot here is that design doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not. This is not an art project. I hate to keep knocking art, but that's not what we're doing here. Our goal is to relay certain information to the client or to your customers, and so once you figure out what exactly it is your customers need to know or what content they need, that content needs to drive the design. And what usually happens, the way this plays out is you'll see someone, they don't really know what their content is. They'll figure that out later, but they want a website. And in their head, website equates to a design. And so they say, I just need a website. I'll fill in the content later. And the problem with that is when it can destroy your content and make it unuseful. So you might find that on this page, because of the layout I've chosen, for example, my content now is really long. I chose this multi-column layout when really what I needed on here based on this content was a single column because there's so much. Or you could have other designs that make it so that cause you to get rid of content because you say it's not going to fit anywhere, or it doesn't make sense. Content that you needed, or more importantly, what I really mean is your customers need it. And so it's always better to start with the audience and the brand and think, what are the things I want to convey, and what's the information they need, and then say, okay, here's the content I'm going to need, and get all the content first and get that written and figured out, and then say, okay, here's the content I have. And thank God that I went over this content, because at first I thought that I needed, I needed this tiny little blurb on my about page. And as I started writing, I realized they need a history of my business, and they need to know all this. There's this great story behind how my parents started the business, and I want to tell that. And so maybe I actually need more pages than I thought I would. And I want them and now that I have all this content, I realized that original design that I wanted, that one-page website that I thought I was going to get away with, just isn't going to work anymore. And I need a completely different design.
Right, right. And also, along with that, by not really knowing what content is important to you, it can be difficult for the designer to decide which information to put where and how prominent to make it, because they need to know first off what content you want to make most prominent, what's most important to you, and then that way they can best decide what to put where, or how to maximize this and make it stand out, or which calls to action you would like to be the one that people take the most. Like, content is just something that needs to come before the design process.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get it down into a little bit more specifics. Cassie, did you have some things you wanted to talk about?
Sure. Well, earlier we were talking about catering to your target market.
Mm.
So, catering to your target market means a variety of things. It could mean the overall design aesthetic of your website. It could be the brand personality of your content, which we just discussed. It could be your overall color scheme that you target towards your audience. I mean, it could be a variety of things. Every part of your website should be geared towards your target market. So, say a bad example that I've seen is like, say your target audience is people who are in their mid 50s. Well, you wouldn't want to choose a typeface that's like at 10-point font
Hmm.
in the lime green color, because it would be visibly hard to read. So,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't want a more modern feel because it would alienate your target customer. You would want something that would be contemporary and have a nice flow that would be easy for them to navigate, but not so forward thinking and so flashy with all this CSS and animations that they can't even navigate through the site and then remember how to get back to the home page.
Right. I think you need to cut people over 50 a little bit more slack, but I think your heart's in the right place. I think it's, you have to consider the fact that you know, like you said, if you're over a certain age, then font sizes maybe need to be upped a little bit. And by the same token, if you're under a certain age, maybe you can get away with you know, something that's a little bit more flashy, or something that a typeface that is really tiny. But I mean, even when you take some of that out, when you take away the age and whatnot, there are a few principles behind choosing typefaces, right, that you might want to follow.
Right. So when you're first choosing your typefaces, there's several different kinds that you can go through, and each one of them conveys a different type of personality. Like you could use a script font, and that would be more elegant and convey a more feminine type vibe throughout your website. Or you could use a sans serif font, which is what Blue Steel Solutions uses, and it's more modern and contemporary and conveys that your company is more innovative. Or you can use a serif font, which is more traditional and can often be seen as professional. And then also, while you're using type, you need to incorporate things like hierarchy, contrast, take color, like we previously mentioned, into consideration. You have to make sure that type is evenly balanced. You don't want a paragraph that's floating over here that isn't evenly weighted down by like an image or a title on the left-hand side. It needs to be evenly balanced. That way it carries itself throughout the site nicely. And just check your spelling, your punctuation, and just make sure you have enough air and padding around your typography.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing that I would say when it comes to typefaces, don't spend a lot of time on it, but pick something that's simple and readable. You know, the worst thing that can happen is when someone spends hours and hours trying to find the perfect font and ends up with something that is not readable at a long length. You know, and so there's a you know, a difference between all these different fonts in terms of readability for long and short. So some fonts you can get away with that. You can have something really scripty that might work for headings if you're going to keep your headings short. But for paragraph text, that's not going to work at all. So that's really important to think about. You don't want to choose a font, even if it's beautiful, that's going to be really hard for people to read for your body text.
Right.
And in terms of colors, do you have any suggestions for color, Cassie?
Well, for colors, it's always good, like I mentioned, to create contrast. So if you have
So when you say contrast, could you define that a little bit for the audience?
So contrast is basically the difference between a background and a foreground, and how light or dark they are in comparison to one another. So if you have a darker background, you would want to use a lighter font color because it would force it into the foreground at the viewer's attention. And then you could also do vice versa and have a dark font and then a light background. But you can't have two dark ones because that limits readability. And then if you have two colors that are on the same plane of vibrancy, then they're going to fight for the viewer's attention, and that won't be as successful either.
Yeah, exactly. So this all comes back to the fonts and colors comes back to our title, keeping it simple. Trying to come up with a complicated, you know, 4 or 5 color palette or scheme, it can mess you up most of the time, and it makes it so, again, it's too much. It can be too much sometimes for the reader and for your audience, and keeping those colors as simple as possible. The simplest way to say it is go with your brand colors and try to pick one or two, two or three if you can. Don't make one color, probably won't work, but two or three, keeping it simple, not getting crazy. And the same goes for the fonts. Don't spend time trying to find some crazy font. Just pick one that's easy to read and go with it.
Right. And I mean, you can never go wrong with black and white. I mean, they have the highest contrast, the best readability. And then if you ever are when in doubt, trying to figure out what your color palette is, always refer to your logo, because that's going to be a continuation of your brand.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned black and white. I guess this website has a little bit of color, but I do want to share this real quick so we can see an example of a really simple site, so you can see what I'm talking about. I think this site here is perfect, a perfect example of using very little in terms of color. This is part of their plugin here, but black and white for most of it, lots of space on the side. And then just little dashes of color here and there that fit in with their brand. But you can see they use lots of, there's no cramming stuff in, there's lots of white space. And, if you've got a good, developer, he or she is going to give you a theme that's going to give you spacing built in anyway. So you don't really have to worry too much about that. But you can see how you don't need a lot here. There's not a lot that's necessary. And as I go through, just these little bits of color make everything stand out. And this is just, it's a gorgeous, simple website that doesn't have, look at this, not cluttered, not all this craziness at the bottom. It's simple and it's effective. And that reminds me, let's talk just a little bit about calls to action. So do you have anything you wanted to say about that, Cassie?
Right. Well, with calls to action, basically, to give
What is
a
a
little
call to
brief
action, real
overview,
quick?
is it's convincing whoever's looking at your site to perform a particular action, such as learn more about your website, or
download a form,
or check out our services and see what we have to offer, anything,
or buy a product.
Right. And a lot of the times people will try to incorporate CSS or some kind of hover effect while they're doing it, and it's really not necessary. I mean, as long as you have nice bold lettering and maybe contrast, once again, to have like that specific button that you use to download that form, to make it pop out from the background, then you have already succeeded in getting your viewers' attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So the calls to action, they need to be, like you said, designed simply so that you're not confusing people. And sometimes some of these calls to action that I've seen, these buttons, are so complicated that you can't even tell where you're supposed to click. Or you click at it and it's like you're missing it and you're clicking all over your screen trying to catch this thing. So and it doesn't even have to be a button. It can be as simple as a link, to the next page. If, for example, you're trying to gather someone's contact information, you could have a button there that says, contact us now, so that they can fill out a form that you've set up. But it can just be a link that says, contact us now. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have lots of fancy buttons. Again, people are very familiar with how the web works today. The majority of your customers, if not all of them, are going to have familiarity with websites. They're going to know how they work. Some of them are going to use them regularly, but even the ones who don't, even people who maybe didn't grow up with the internet and just hardly ever use it, they still will have little problem figuring something out if you're clear. if you make it very clear what they need to do. And a button that says, buy now, can be so much more effective than, some long, some crazy button that flashes and does a bunch of stuff that's not necessary. So keeping things simple, and like you said, it depends on your audience. If your audience is very tech savvy, you might be able to get away with a little bit of that. But if your audience is not familiar with technology and doesn't use it very often, you don't want ever to make the reason that you missed a sale or a lead to be that someone couldn't figure out the website.
Right, right. And something also to draw in viewers' attention to your call of actions further that I've seen people incorporate is using things like personal pronouns such as me, my, you, or your, or using more active language such as discover or explore or learn. It really helps to engage the viewer, and it phrases a saying with different words so as to make the overall experience more different and more unique than other competitors' websites in the same industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good to stand out, obviously, and that can be done with language.
Right.
But to get back to design a little bit, is there anything else that you wanted to say about design, Cassie?
Well, I mean, for calls of action specifically, you can experiment with button shapes, but like Adam said, you don't want to use anything that's too outlandish, but maybe use something like if your logo incorporated a circular shape like blue steel, or if it's more square, then maybe all of your call to actions are more square, and then it's further an extension of your brand.
Yeah. And if you have a responsive website, a mobile responsive website, then your buttons are still going to be of a usable size, no matter what platform someone's looking at them on, hopefully. But that's another thing to consider is that, okay, maybe we, for some reason, want to make this button really, really small. That might not be the best idea, because if someone's or really large on the other hand, because if someone's looking at it on mobile, maybe that takes up half the screen and is confusing, or maybe it's hard to find on a small screen. So again, that's something to consider, is that how are people looking at your website? How are they coming to it? Are your viewers, is your customer base probably going to be using a desktop, or are they primarily using mobile? And if they're using mobile, are my buttons easy to see? And that's something that you can check fairly easily. But one thing that I think we sort of talked about a little bit, and I would like to say, is that you should get someone to test your design. You should get someone to test your website, someone who, and this doesn't have to be, you can go into user testing. There's some websites that allow you to do a little bit of that for free, and then you don't have to pay a whole lot to do more of it. But even just gathering 3 or 4 members of your family after the website's been made and saying, hey, try to find this on my website, or I want you to go to my website and click around it and see if you get confused, or here's this, I want you to complete this specific task, like go to the website and put something in your shopping cart and go to checkout, and tell me how it works. Because and especially if you watch them do it, you'll see very quickly if there are any problems. And the majority of problems, the real big problems, are going to become apparent right away. Now, you need lots and lots and lots of user testing to get rid of every single problem. But there's, for free and quickly, you can get rid of a whole bunch of big problems right away if they're there, by checking with a few people.
Right, right. And then along with testing, you always want to make sure that it functions well on mobile and on tablet. And a lot of things that I've seen people do once their websites do in fact become responsive is they'll switch over to this new platform and then important content or information just drops off. And they didn't really take the time to figure out where that was going to fit into the overall layout. So essentially, the best practice whenever designing a website is to work from the smallest platform, which is usually mobile, and working your way up, because the simplest, most concise form where you need to determine the non-essentials and the essentials is going to be on the phone, and then that will help you to grow into larger surfaces.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. Well, we're just about out of time. So do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share about design?
Just when you're first starting out in design, just stick to the basics, keep it simple. Don't try to do everything too fancy because you don't want to alienate your target audience. Just try to get the message out there in a simple and nicely designed manner, and everything will be okay.
That's perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cassie, for enlightening us on design. And that is all we have. So remember, this is part of a series. To see the rest of it, just go to our blog at bluesteelsolutions.com. And we've got several other videos on the website review series. And check it out so that you can see if your website measures up. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good evening.